They tried to break into my barn, but the law was already waiting inside. My barn wasn't fancy old cedar planks, red paint faded to rust, a big sliding door that groaned like it remembered every storm since. 1975 to me, it was heritage. My grandfather built it with his hands and a prayer, but to the Willow Creek HOA, it was an eyesore. At least that's what Corinne Bloom, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, called it. She moved into the neighborhood 2 years ago, right across the dirt lane $1 million house, white fences, zero humility. From the day she arrived, Corinne treated the HOA like her private army. She complained about the unsightly farm structures, about my rooster violating noise guidelines, even about my tractor being visible from the main road. Every complaint was followed by another letter, polite words, legal threats, and signatures from neighbors who were too scared to say no. But what really set her off was what I kept inside that bar. I ran a licensed woodworking business from my barn, handmade furniture, reclaimed wood, local commissions. I had every permit, every inspection passed, every tax form clean. But Corinne didn't believe that. She was convinced I was running an illegal business or storing hazardous equipment. Truth was, the only dangerous thing in that barn was my table saw and a few honest hours of work. One afternoon, she showed up at my gate with 2 HOA board members and a clipboard like a sheriff in her own mind. "We're here to inspect your barn for violations," she said. I smiled, leaned on the fence, and said, "You'll need a warrant or a miracle." She didn't like that answer. It began slowly, the kind of thing you almost convince yourself you're imagining. At first, it was the sound, tires crunching gravel outside the gate when no one should be there, doors closing softly in the dark. I'd step onto the porch, flashlight in hand, and see nothing but the faint reflection of taillights disappearing down the hill. Maybe a lost driver, I told myself. Maybe someone checking an address. But then it started happening again. And again. One afternoon, I came home from town and noticed a white SUV parked just across the road from my driveway. It wasn't one of the neighbors' cars, too new, too spotless, too carefully positioned to be casual. The driver sat with sunglasses on, pretending to scroll on his phone. I watched him through the side mirror as I got out of my truck. The moment I looked his way, he started the engine and drove off, slow, deliberate, like someone who wanted to make sure I saw him leaving. That was the first time I felt that cold knot in my stomach, the one that tells you something's shifted. By the third night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Flashlights flickered near the fence line at 2 a.m., beams darting between trees like restless ghosts. My motion sensor lights kept triggering, and when I checked the cameras in the morning, I saw them. 2 figures in reflective vests, one holding a clipboard, the other shining a light over my property markers. They moved with that self-important posture I'd come to recognize from every HOA meeting, the "we have authority here" stance. Corinne wasn't even trying to hide it. The next day, a letter arrived in my mailbox, printed, formal, with the HOA seal in the corner. "Routine property compliance check," it said, "ensuring adherence to neighborhood standards." The date listed. The same night I saw the flashlights. They'd already decided to legitimize their trespass after the fact. I walked the fence line myself that morning, boots heavy in the dew-soaked grass. That's when I found the first real sign, footprints near the barn door. Fresh, deep, too large to be mine, with a tread pattern that matched the security boots the HOA volunteers wore during their community patrols. There were 2 sets of them, packing in circles near the latch. They weren't here to monitor anything. They were here to look for something. Maybe they thought I was hiding unapproved equipment or building something off-grid. Maybe they wanted leverage. But whatever they were after, they'd crossed the line, literally and legally. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, coffee in hand, watching the road. The white SUV came back around midnight. It parked in the same spot as before, lights off, engine idling. I grabbed my camera and zoomed in just enough to see the driver's face when the glow from his phone lit up the cabin. It wasn't a stranger. It was one of Corinne's board members, the same guy who once lectured me about neighborhood integrity because I used a non-approved mailbox design. I smiled just a little because now I had proof. The next morning I installed additional cameras, high enough that no one could reach them without a ladder. One by the barn, one overlooking the north fence, and another hidden in the old oak tree facing the road. I rerouted the footage to a cloud server, set alerts for motion detection, and printed the stills from the previous night. If they wanted to play watchdog, I'd show them what a real record looked like. Later that week, I caught one of them on camera again, this time climbing halfway over the fence. He froze when the infrared light flashed red and bolted. I paused the footage, zoomed in, and there it was. HOA volunteer vest, the word monitor printed across the back. That was the moment the annoyance turned into something sharper. This wasn't just petty harassment anymore. It was trespassing, intimidation, and stalking under the thin veil of community duty. They thought the HOA gave them authority over private land. They were wrong. The next morning, I called the sheriff's department. The deputy on duty, a calm man named Brooks, came by to take a look. He studied the photos, then the footprints, then the letter from the HOA. "You've got enough here," he said, tapping the papers, "to make this official." He promised to file a report and have a word with the board. But even he warned me with a half-smile. HOA types don't like being told no. They'll test boundaries till someone draws one in concrete. He was right. The following night I heard footsteps again, slower this time, more cautious. Whoever it was knew they were being watched. My cameras caught only brief glimpses, a shadow here, a flicker there, always just out of full view. They weren't looking for violations anymore. They were testing my patience. So I decided to send my own message. The next morning, I printed a large sign and nailed it to the inside of the main gate, facing outward. It read, "Private property, TRESPASSERS will be reported and recorded." Below it, I added a small laminated photo, a grainy still of their volunteer halfway over the fence. For the next few days, the white SUV stopped showing up. The flashlights vanished. The fence stayed untouched. But I knew better than to believe it was over. Corinne didn't back down that easily. I could almost picture her sitting at her kitchen table, lips pursed, sipping coffee while plotting her next move. To her, this wasn't a neighborhood issue, it was control. And people like her don't stop until someone reminds them where their authority ends. That realization settled something in me. I wasn't just defending my property anymore. I was defending my peace, my right to live without being watched, measured, or approved. So when I walked the perimeter that evening, I didn't feel afraid. I felt ready. The air was cool, the wind brushing through the dry grass. Somewhere in the dark, an owl called once and fell silent. Let them come, I thought. I've got cameras, the law, and time on my side. And this time, if Corinne's patrol crossed that fence again, it wouldn't be a neighborhood dispute. It would be evidence, the kind that ends up in court, because I wasn't going to let it slide. Not again. The sun hadn't fully climbed over the hills when I got in my truck, the air still cool enough to see my breath. The drive into town felt heavier than usual, not because of the distance, but because of what I was about to set in motion. I'd lived in that county my whole life. My father had built the barn, my grandfather had cleared the first road. And in all that time, I'd never had to call the law on a neighbor until Corinne showed up. The sheriff's office sat right across from the feed store, a squat brick building that looked like it hadn't been remodeled since the 70s. The American flag out front was sun-faded and frayed at the edges, just like everything else in town. When I walked in, the deputy at the desk glanced up, nodded, and said, "He's in the back. Go on through." Everyone knew everyone here. Introductions weren't necessary. Sheriff Hank McAllister was exactly where I expected him to be, leaning back in his chair, coffee in one hand, old cowboy hat tilted low over his eyes. He looked up when I entered, smiled the kind of half-smile that said he'd already guessed why I was there, and motioned for me to sit. "Heard you've got yourself a situation out there," he said, setting the coffee aside. "Corinne again." I nodded and slid my phone across his desk. The screen showed stills from my security footage, flashlights near the fence, a man climbing over, the white SUV parked by the road. Hank scrolled through them slowly, his expression unreadable, but I could see the spark of amusement under the surface. "She's got volunteers now," he muttered. "Last I checked, HOA bylaws don't come with badges." "They think they're above the law," I said. "Or maybe they just forgot it applies to them too." He leaned back, crossed his arms, and sighed. "You know, Karen's called this office more times than I can count. Complaints about noise, grass height, unapproved decorations. Last month she reported a kid for painting his fence the wrong shade of white. I sent a deputy out and he found her measuring the slats with a ruler." I couldn't help but laugh. "Sounds like her." "Yeah," he said, "but this time it's different. What you've got here, this isn't petty, it's trespass, harassment, maybe even criminal mischief if we can prove damage." He tapped the screen, paused on the image of the man halfway over my fence. "And I think we can." He looked up at me then, his eyes sharp but kind. "You mind if we handle this our way?" I knew that tone. It was the same one he used when he dealt with poachers back in the day, firm, measured, and unforgettable. "You mean legal?" I asked. He grinned. "Exactly, legal but memorable." I leaned forward. "I'm listening." He reached into his desk drawer, pulled out a yellow notepad, and started writing. "Here, what we're gonna do," he said. "You'll file an official complaint today. I'll sign it myself and open an investigation into the HOA's patrol activity. That gives us authority to monitor the area for unauthorized entry. Meanwhile, you keep your cameras running but don't confront them. Let them hang themselves." "And what happens when they show up again?" I asked. He smiled. "That's the memorable part." He tore a page from the pad and slid it toward me. It was a simple form, a notice of property trespass signed by the sheriff's department. "We're going to post these around your property line," he said. "Official, stamped, and dated. The next time one of Karen's little deputies steps a toe past that fence, it's no longer a neighborhood disagreement, it's an arrestable offense." I studied the paper, then looked back at him. "You think that'll stop her?" he chuckled. "No. But it'll make her think twice. And when she doesn't, we'll be there to make sure the message sticks." I left the station that morning with a folder full of legal notices and a strange kind of peace in my chest. Hank wasn't just taking my side, he was setting the stage. By the time I reached my property, the sun had burned through the morning haze, and the air smelled like dry pine and dust. I walked the perimeter slowly, hammering each notice onto a post, the sound of metal on wood echoing through the quiet fields. Every thud felt like a small victory, a claim of ownership, a reminder that my family's land wasn't some playground for a power-hungry HOA. That afternoon, Hank's deputy Garrett, a young guy with mirrored sunglasses and a calm drawl, pulled up the driveway in his cruiser. "Sheriff said to keep an eye on things for a few days," he told me. "Make sure your visitors understand what a boundary looks like." He parked by the barn, lights off but presence clear. Just the sight of that patrol car on my property felt like armor. That night, as the sun went down, I didn't have to wait long. The white SUV showed up again, creeping along the road, headlights dimmed. This time, instead of driving off when I stepped outside, it slowed and then stopped. The driver's door opened. Out stepped one of Karen's board members, clipboard in hand, trying to look official. He froze when he saw the sheriff's cruiser sitting in the shadows by the barn. Garrett stepped out, calm as can be, one hand resting casually on his belt. "Evenin'," he said. "You folks lost." The man stammered something about routine HOA checks and community safety. Garrett nodded, still polite. "Sure thing, but you're aware this is private property, correct? And that the owners filed a trespass notice with the sheriff's office." The man's face went pale. "Oh, we weren't aware." "You are now," Garrett said, his voice never rising. "Turn around, get back in your car, and don't come back unless you're invited. You can tell Ms. Karen Hale that message came from Sheriff McAllister himself." The man didn't argue. He got back in his SUV so fast he nearly tripped over his own clipboard. When he drove off, his tires sprayed gravel into the ditch. Garrett looked at me, grinning. "Guess word will spread." And it did. For the next few days, not a single SUV showed up. No flashlights, no patrols, no late-night compliance checks. The road was quiet again, the kind of quiet that feels earned. But deep down, I knew Karen wouldn't let this go. She'd taken it personally. And when people like her feel humiliated, they don't back off, they double down. Still, as I stood at the gate that night looking at the sheriff's sign glinting under the porch light, I allowed myself a small smile. Because this time I wasn't just defending my land, I had the law standing beside me. And whatever Karen planned next, she'd have to get through both of us first. For the first time in weeks, the plan wasn't about defense, it was about patience. And patience, I've learned, is harder than anger. I told no one except the sheriff's office. Not my neighbors, not even Mrs. Alvarez, who'd started bringing me fresh bread out of solidarity. Hank said it best: the quieter the bait, the louder the catch. So I got quiet. For 7 long days, I moved through a rhythm that felt both natural and rehearsed. I kept the barn lights on later than usual, let them glow through the slats like a quiet invitation. I left the big doors cracked open, not wide enough to look careless, but just enough to whisper temptation. From the road, it looked like I'd been working late, maybe distracted, maybe forgetful. That was the hook. Inside, I made it believable. I swept the concrete floor clean, pushed the old machinery to the far wall, and cleared a wide space right in the center. I set out a small wooden table with a thermos of coffee, 2 mismatched chairs, and a stack of old ledgers, decoys for what they thought they'd find, evidence of some unregistered repair work or non-compliant storage. Karen's patrols were always sniffing around for technicalities. This time, I wanted to give them one they couldn't resist. By Friday, everything was ready. The sheriff's department had prepped their part quietly, just like me. Around dusk, an unmarked truck rolled down my driveway and slipped behind the barn where no one from the road could see. The engine shut off. The air fell still. Sheriff Hank climbed out first, wearing his old leather jacket instead of his uniform, blending in, but still every bit the law. "Nice setup," he said, peering through the barn door. "You've got a flair for drama." I smirked, figured Karen would appreciate the show. Behind him, 2 deputies settled in. One was Deputy Garrett, the same guy who'd scared off Karen's patrol earlier that week. The other was new, carrying a compact camera rig from the department's property crime division, the kind that could catch a mouse blinking from 50 yards away. They'd installed a motion sensor on the side of the barn, linked to the sheriff's phone. Any movement past the gate would trigger a silent alert. All we had to do was wait. Night came fast, swallowing the horizon in a thick purple haze. The barn lights cut through it like a beacon, casting long shadows over the gravel drive. Inside, the air smelled of oil, pine dust, and old wood, familiar, grounding, almost comforting. I sat at the table, pretending to work, while Hank and the deputies stayed hidden behind the truck, whispering quietly over their radios. Hours passed. The crickets droned. The wind shifted. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and went quiet. Then faintly I heard it, the low hum of an engine. Headlights blinked through the trees, off then on again, creeping closer. I didn't move. The truck stopped by the fence line just outside camera range. 2 figures got out, flashlights off, moving slow, deliberate, like they'd done this before. They stayed low, whispering. I caught the glint of one of their reflective vests as the moon slipped through the clouds. HOA security, no doubt, the same ones I'd caught climbing the fence weeks ago. The motion alert buzzed softly in Hank's pocket. He glanced at the screen, nodded once, and whispered into his mic. The deputies shifted, ready but patient. Hank's expression didn't change. He was carved from calm. The figures moved closer, one at the fence, one scouting along the side of the barn. I heard the faint creak of the gate latch, then the crunch of gravel under their boots. My pulse picked up not fear but anticipation. They thought the darkness was their ally. They thought the barn was empty. The first one peeked through the crack in the door. I saw the flashlight beam sweep across the floor, the table, the thermos, the ledgers. The second one whispered, "Told you he's hiding something." I let them step inside before I moved. Their eyes hadn't even adjusted when I clicked on the floodlight. The barn burst alive in white brilliance, freezing them mid-step like deer in headlights. They flinched, blinking, trying to cover their faces. "Well," I said evenly, standing by the table, If you're looking for coffee, it's still warm." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Hank's voice came from behind them, calm but commanding. "Sheriff's Department, hands where I can see them." Both men froze. The deputies stepped out of the shadows, badges glinting in the floodlight. The camera's red recording light blinked steadily, capturing everything: the trespass, the tools in their hands, the HOA logos on their jackets. One of them stammered, "We were just checking for violations." Hank finished for him, raising an eyebrow. "Because from where I'm standing, the only violation here is you two on private property at 1 in the morning." The taller one tried to explain, saying they were authorized volunteers acting on community safety directives. Hank let him talk just long enough to dig himself deeper before cutting in. "You're trespassing under county law," he said, tone flat. "You're being recorded on official evidence equipment, and unless you want to spend the night in county lockup, I suggest you step outside and wait by your vehicle." The silence that followed was thick enough to taste. The shorter one finally muttered, "Karen told us," and stopped himself. Hank's eyes flicked up. "Yeah," he said, almost amused. "I figured she did." By the time they were escorted out, their faces were pale and their excuses had run dry. Hank handed me a signed copy of the incident report before leaving. "We'll file this under criminal trespass and harassment," he said. "But don't be surprised if Karen tries to twist it into some misunderstanding. People like her never think they're the bad guy." He paused before climbing into his truck. "You did good tonight. You stayed calm. You let the evidence do the talking. That's how you win these things, not with fists but with facts." The unmarked truck rolled away quietly, its taillights vanishing into the dark. The deputies followed, leaving me alone with the barn lights still burning. I stood there for a while, letting the silence return. The air was cool, the gravel crunching softly under my boots. For the first time since this began, I felt the balance shift. The fear was gone, replaced by a steady, deliberate certainty. Karen thought she could intimidate me with shadows and patrols, but now the spotlight was on her. And we weren't done yet. At exactly 11:47 p.m., the motion sensor on the east side of the barn flickered to life, casting a faint red glow across the gravel. A moment later, 3 silhouettes slipped through the fence, their movements clumsy but deliberate. They wore black clothes, gloves, and cheap masks that caught the moonlight. One of them carried a crowbar. Another had a flashlight taped to a walkie-talkie, its static whisper breaking the silence every few seconds. From the darkness, I watched through the camera feed in my truck, the sheriff beside me, his thumb hovering over the radio switch. "They're actually doing it," I murmured. Hank didn't even look surprised. "Told you, folks like that can't help themselves when they think they're untouchable." The intruders reached the barn. One knelt near the padlock, fumbling with a small toolkit. The other two scanned the area, whispering fast. Through the feed, I could hear snippets of their conversation. "Karen said the evidence is in the east stall," one muttered. "Evidence of what?" another scoffed. "That he's got more land than he should. Who cares?" "HOA cares," the first hissed back. "She said we're helping protect the community." Protect, that word made Hank snort softly. Protecting their egos, more like it. A metallic click sounded as the padlock popped open. The door creaked an inch, then another, the hinges protesting from years of dust and weather. The flashlight beam wavered across the floor, passing over the empty stalls, the scattered straw, the faint shimmer of dust motes floating in the air like ghosts. Then came the moment. The first intruder pushed the door wide open and stepped inside. The others followed, shoulders tense, flashlights darting across the shadows. One pointed to the small table I'd set up, the thermos, the chair, the papers stacked neatly. "See," he said, "he's hiding something, probably property records or—" He froze, because from the far corner a shape shifted. A slow scrape of a boot, the faint reflection of metal. And then from the dark, Sheriff Hank stepped forward. His badge caught the faint beam of the flashlight, gleaming like a warning. His voice was low, measured, carrying just enough steel to cut through their fear. "Evening," he said. "Y'all here for the woodwork or the jail time?" The silence that followed was almost comical. One intruder dropped his flashlight. It clattered across the floor, the beam spinning wildly until it landed on the deputies emerging from behind the tractor. Hands went up, excuses flew out, overlapping in a jumble of panic. "It's not what it looks like. Karen told us to. We thought this was community property." "Sure you did," Hank interrupted. "Community property usually doesn't have padlocks, fences, and trespassing signs, son." He nodded to his deputies. "Cuff 'em before they remember how to lie better." The three were handcuffed, their walkie-talkies buzzing uselessly with Karen's voice. "Are you inside yet? Do you see anything?" One deputy pressed the button and replied flatly, "Yes, ma'am. We see a whole lot. You might want to come down here yourself." The silence on the other end was beautiful. Meanwhile, I stepped out from my truck, flashlight in hand. The gravel crunched under my boots as I approached the scene. The men looked up at me, faces pale, eyes darting anywhere but mine. One tried to speak. "Sir, we didn't mean." "Save it," I cut in. "You climbed my fence, broke my lock, and wandered into my barn in the middle of the night. That's meaning enough." Hank chuckled softly. "Don't worry, boys. You'll have plenty of time to explain your intentions downtown." He turned to me. "You good with us pressing charges?" "Every single one we can," I said without hesitation. "And make sure Karen's name is on the report. She sent them, let her feel what accountability tastes like." Hank nodded approvingly. "That's the spirit." As the deputies loaded the intruders into the back of the patrol truck, one of them muttered under his breath, "She said this would be easy." I smiled. She lied. The following morning, the town woke up to a spectacle. 3 HOA volunteers arrested for trespassing and attempted burglary. The footage from the sheriff's body cam, fully legal and public record, spread like wildfire. Every local news station picked it up. Karen tried to issue a statement calling it a misunderstanding, but that didn't last long. The sheriff released the radio transcripts and security footage showing them cutting the lock. There was no misunderstanding, only exposure. For years, the HOA had bullied residents quietly, with letters and fines and whispered threats. But that night, under the glow of the patrol truck's lights, their empire cracked. People saw what they really were, not guardians of community order but self-appointed tyrants drunk on imagined power. Hank stopped by the next day, leaning against his truck with that slow, satisfied grin of his. "Well," he said, "I'd say that was memorable enough, wouldn't you?" I laughed. "Oh, it's memorable, all right. I bet Corinne hasn't slept since." He tipped his hat. "Good. Maybe next time she'll remember that fences go both ways. They keep trouble out, but sometimes they keep the guilty in." That night, as I stood by the barn door, the same one they'd pried open, I let the quiet wash over me. The land was still, the stars were sharp, and for the first time in months I felt something close to peace. Not triumph exactly, just balance restored. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Because people like Karen don't learn from justice, they react to it. And the more she tried to twist the story, the more the truth would burn her clean. Karen's SUV screeched to a halt at the end of my drive, gravel spitting under the tires. Her headlights cut through the night like searchlights, slicing across the barn doors, the patrol truck, and the flashing red and blue glow of the deputies' cruisers. For a moment, the entire scene looked like a movie, her perfect suburban world colliding with the cold truth of law and consequence. The driver's door flew open, and out stepped Karen, barefoot, hair tangled, wrapped in silk pajamas that shimmered in the flashing lights. Her fury was immediate, boiling over before she even took in what was happening. "What is going on here?" she barked, voice echoing through the quiet fields. "Why are my people in handcuffs? Who authorized this circus?" Sheriff Hank turned slowly, hands folded behind his back, posture calm as ever. The silver badge on his chest caught the light from her SUV as he spoke in a steady drawl. "We found your patrol trespassing on private property, ma'am," he said. "Breaking and entering, to be specific. You're aware you organized this, correct?" Corinne froze mid-step, her mouth half open, confidence faltering. I only told them to check compliance. This is ridiculous." Hank took a step closer, his boots crunching the gravel. "Compliance doesn't include cutting padlocks, ma'am, or sneaking around barns at midnight. Unless your HOA guidelines recently added criminal trespass as a community service." Her face drained of color. For the first time since I'd known her, Corinne Hale looked small, not because she'd physically shrunk, but because the aura she'd built around herself, the authority, the control, the constant smug assurance that she was untouchable, had just evaporated. I stepped out from the shadows, arms crossed. "Funny thing about compliance," I said quietly. "It usually works both ways. You spend years writing up violations for mailbox heights and lawn lengths, but you didn't think the law applied to you, did you?" She turned on me with venom. "Don't you dare speak to me. This is private HOA business." The sheriff gave a low chuckle. "No, ma'am, this is county business now." One of the deputies approached, holding up a small evidence bag. Inside it was a smartphone, still buzzing faintly from unanswered messages. "We confiscated this from one of your patrol members," he said. "Group chats under your name, Mrs. Hale. These the orders you gave." Corinne's jaw tightened. "That's not, you can't just." Hank cut her off with a calm wave. "We already got the warrant, ma'am. Judge signed it an hour ago. You might want to read your own words before claiming you're innocent." The deputy unlocked the phone and held it up for everyone to see. On the screen, in neat bubbles of text, was a message time-stamped earlier that evening. "Make sure you get inside. Check for anything that violates property codes. We'll use it for legal grounds later. If he's hiding anything, take pictures. Don't get caught." The last line hung in the air like a curse. Corinne blinked rapidly, her composure fracturing like thin ice. "Those messages were taken out of context. I was referring to a neighborly inspection. Everyone in this community has the right to." "To what?" I interrupted. "Break into private property because you don't like who owns it." Her gaze snapped toward me, eyes full of hatred but trembling with fear. "You've been a problem since the day you moved back. You think you can ignore the HOA. You think rules don't matter." Sheriff Hank stepped between us, his tone cutting through the rising tension. "The only person ignoring rules tonight is standing in silk pajamas yelling at law enforcement," he said evenly. "I'd recommend you quiet down before you add obstruction to your list." The crowd of deputies and onlookers, neighbors drawn by the flashing lights, started to whisper. Phones were out, recording every second. For years, Corinne had humiliated people in board meetings, fined them over nonsense, called police over lawn chairs. Now the script had flipped completely, and everyone was watching her squirm. Corinne's breathing quickened. "This is a setup," she hissed. You planned this." "Sure did," Hank said dryly. "You broke the law often enough. We just figured we'd give you a chance to do it in front of witnesses this time." Her eyes darted to the patrol truck where her volunteers sat in silence, wrists cuffed, faces blank with shock. The reality of it began to sink in. Her empire, built on threats, fines, and intimidation, was unraveling right in front of her. "Those men were following my instructions," she said weakly. "You can't arrest them for—" Hank's voice hardened. "Ma'am, you just confessed on record that you gave those instructions." He nodded to the deputy holding the phone. "That's all we needed." Corinne took a step back, then another. "You can't do this to me," she whispered. "I am the HOA." "No," I said quietly. "You were." For a moment, she just stood there, trembling in the cool night air, her silk pajamas fluttering in the breeze, her SUV's headlights cutting across the field like the last spotlight of a play that was over. The sheriff signaled his deputy. "Go ahead and read her the charges," he said. The deputy's voice was professional, steady. Karen Hale, you are under investigation for conspiracy to trespass, property damage, and misuse of HOA authority. You have the right to remain silent. The words echoed through the night, each one stripping away another layer of her false power. Neighbors peered from their porches, some filming, others just watching in stunned silence. Karen tried to protest, but her voice broke halfway through. This is insane, she whispered, shaking her head. You're making a mistake. No, ma'am, Hank said, stepping aside as the deputy led her toward the patrol car. You made it, repeatedly. They guided her into the back seat. She glanced at me, eyes wide, burning with disbelief, maybe even regret. But it was too late. The door closed with a solid thunk, and just like that, the queen of the HOA was no longer in charge of anything. The sheriff turned to me, brushing dust off his coat. Well, he said with a faint smile, guess we can call that a successful evening. I nodded, watching the SUV disappear down the long dirt road, its taillights fading into the dark horizon. Yeah, I said quietly. Took a long time, but justice has good timing. Behind us, the barn stood still and silent, the night air settling around it like a held breath finally released. The fences were unbroken. The land was mine again, and for the first time in a long time, the power was back where it belonged. By morning, the town woke up to a headline no one expected. HOA president caught organizing illegal break-in. The story spread faster than gossip at a church potluck. It started on a local Facebook page, then jumped to the county news, then the radio station that usually only talked about weather and high school football. Before noon, people were sharing screenshots, videos, and memes. Karen's once pristine reputation was unraveling in real time, pixel by pixel, post by post. Her patrol team, the same people who had strutted around in neon vests and clipboards, now played the part of victims. They swore she'd manipulated them, told them it was a routine HOA inspection. One even went live online, shaky-voiced, saying, "We thought it was legal," she said the sheriff approved it. But the sheriff's footage told a different story. Every angle was recorded, the trespass, the cut lock, the whispered commands, the moment they stepped inside the barn. When the video hit the evening news, it wasn't edited or narrated, just raw, clear evidence. Karen's voice could be heard giving the orders. Her text scrolled across the screen like a confession she couldn't take back. By noon, the town group chat was on fire. People who once feared her were laughing out loud. One comment read, "Guess the HOA finally found a rule they couldn't rewrite." Another, "About time someone stood up to her." The sheriff's department released an official statement. An active investigation is underway regarding the unlawful entry onto private property by members of a local homeowners association. Evidence confirms direct involvement of the HOA president, Karen Hale, in coordinating the event. Charges under review include criminal trespass, conspiracy, and property violation. For once, the county's official tone carried something that sounded a lot like satisfaction. Karen's arrest photo hit the local blog that afternoon. Her hair was frizzed, her eyes tired and furious. She looked nothing like the woman who'd once strutted through board meetings in tailored blazers, talking over everyone. The comment section filled with words she couldn't delete, not this time. Meanwhile, the HOA scrambled to contain the fallout. Emergency meetings were called. Statements were drafted and redrafted, full of phrases like unfortunate misunderstanding and temporary leadership suspension. But the damage was done. Every homeowner in that community had seen what their president had become, a bully caught in the act. Within days, 3 board members resigned. One cited stress. Another said, "I didn't sign up for this." A third quietly deleted her social media and stopped showing up to meetings entirely. The HOA office, once a place of polished decor and thinly veiled threats, looked abandoned. The flag out front drooped halfway down its pole. Notices that used to intimidate residents were now just paper cluttering the bulletin board. When Karen's formal charges were announced, it became official: criminal trespass, 2nd degree. Conspiracy to commit property damage, abuse of administrative authority. Her position as HOA president was suspended immediately. The vice president, a meek man named Robert who had spent years avoiding confrontation, now found himself in charge and terrified. In his first public statement, he stammered through his words, promising transparency and rebuilding community trust. But the community had already moved on. For once, their attention wasn't on the HOA's rules or citations. It was on the farmer at the edge of Maple Road, the man they'd once called stubborn, difficult, or anti-progress. Now they called him something else. At the diner that week, people nodded when I walked in. A few offered a handshake, one even paid for my coffee. Mrs. Alvarez dropped by with a pie and said, "You did what we all wanted to do, just legally." Even the mail carrier, who used to avoid my driveway because of Corinne's complaints, gave me a thumbs up from his truck. It was strange, being the center of something other than trouble. The sheriff stopped by a few days later, leaning on the hood of his truck with that knowing smirk. "Told you we'd make it memorable," he said. "You sure did," I replied. "Didn't expect half the county to tune in, though." He chuckled. "Corinne made her own audience. All we did was give them the ending they wanted." The next week, a public meeting was held to discuss leadership transition. It was supposed to be professional and civil. It was. Residents lined the walls, many holding copies of the news article or screenshots from the sheriff's footage. When Corinne's name came up, someone in the back shouted, "Lock her mailbox too." The room erupted with laughter, the kind that comes after years of pent-up frustration. For the first time in that HOA's history, the members voted unanimously to suspend all patrol activities, to end night inspections, and to review every single policy Corinne had ever written. The community wasn't just distancing itself from her, it was cleaning house. Corinne, out on bail and hiding behind a closed gate, sent a letter to the board claiming she'd been betrayed by those she trusted most. No one responded. The letter ended up being leaked to the local paper, another public embarrassment she couldn't control. As for me, life grew quiet again. The fields returned to their usual rhythm. The hum of cicadas, the distant bark of dogs, the creak of the old barn door in the wind. My property felt mine again, not watched, not whispered about, not invaded. One afternoon I passed by the old HOA clubhouse. The flag had been replaced, the sign freshly painted. Beneath it, someone had planted flowers, daisies of all things, with a small handmade sign stuck in the soil. "Community means respect." I didn't stop. I just smiled and kept driving. The sheriff was right. Justice doesn't always come loud or violent. Sometimes it just comes honest, undeniable, and public enough that no one dares to twist it again. For the first time in years, the town wasn't laughing at the farmer on Maple Road. They were cheering for him. The barn stood tall again, the red paint gleaming like a promise. I'd spent a week sanding, scraping, and repainting the boards that once echoed with tension and flashlights and whispered trespass. Now, when the morning light hit it, the wood looked almost alive again, a quiet monument to how far things had come. The old lock on the barn door still had a faint dent from that night, the one Corinne's patrol tried to pry open. I never fixed it completely. Some scars deserve to stay, a reminder of what was endured and what was overcome. Sheriff Hank stopped by one morning, coffee in hand, boots dusty from the field. He leaned against the fence like he'd been doing it his whole life, squinting at the sunrise burning through the mist. "You know," he said after a long sip, "that's the quietest this town been in years." I chuckled, watching the light crawl across the barn roof. Amazing what a little light does to people who love the dark. He smiled, that rare, satisfied grin of a man who'd seen too much trouble and was finally watching peace hold its ground. Corinne's trial wrapped up last week. Probation, fines, and banned from any HOA position for life. He paused, letting the words settle in. "She's moving out of town. Sold her house yesterday. Guess the neighborhood finally getting its air back," I said. "Guess so." He handed me an envelope, the official closure notice from the county, confirming the end of the investigation. I tucked it into my jacket pocket, more for the symbolism than the record. It meant something deeper than legality. It meant no one could question who this land belonged to again. After he drove off, I stood by the gate for a while, listening to the wind in the grass. The sound was steady, unhurried. It didn't carry tension anymore, just calm. A few days later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. Cream-colored paper, embossed with a seal I recognized instantly. Lakewood Estates Homeowners Association. For a second I half expected another demand, another rule, another thinly veiled threat. But when I unfolded it, the tone surprised me. Dear Mr. Walker, on behalf of the newly elected board of the Lakewood Estates HOA, I would like to formally apologize for the actions of our former president and members. Their behavior does not reflect the values this community was built on. We acknowledge the distress and damage caused by their unlawful conduct and are committed to rebuilding trust with our residents and neighbors. Respectfully, Eleanor Pierce, HOA President. Was simple, short, and for once sincere. I framed that letter and hung it in the barn, right next to the old "No Trespassing" sign Karen had once used as a weapon of control. The irony wasn't lost on me. 2 pieces of paper, one symbol of arrogance, one of accountability, both reminders of what power looks like when it's misused and when it's finally redeemed. In the weeks that followed, life began to hum with something close to normal. Neighbors waved when they passed. The Alvarez kids brought over muffins. Even a few HOA members, ones who had once looked at me like a problem, stopped by to help repaint the fence line. "We're starting over," one of them said quietly. I nodded, not needing an apology. Their actions said enough. The town itself seemed to breathe easier. The gossip that once circled like vultures over every HOA feud turned toward lighter things: the fair, the weather, the new cafe that opened downtown. The sheriff joked that the county hotline hadn't received a single HOA-related complaint in a month. A new record. The barn became something of a local symbol. People stopped to take pictures, saying it stood for fairness. Though I never asked for that kind of attention. To me, it was just home. A home that had been tested, threatened, but never taken. Some evenings I'd sit on the porch with a mug of coffee, listening to the cicadas tuning up their chorus. The stars felt closer now, brighter. Maybe it was just peace making everything clearer. One afternoon, a delivery truck stopped by the gate. The driver handed me a small package with no return address. Inside was a keychain, a miniature silver horseshoe, and a note written in tidy handwriting. "For luck, not that you need it. From someone who finally sleeps well at night." No signature, but I didn't need one. It was from one of the neighbors, maybe even a former HOA member. That was enough. The war was over, and small gestures like that were the truest kind of victory. As summer turned to fall, the maples around the property blazed with color. The barn's red paint matched the leaves, a perfect reflection of renewal. Every morning, the sunlight cut through the mist, gilding the fields in gold. Sometimes I'd catch myself smiling for no reason, just grateful that the land was still mine, that the quiet had returned, that the people who once stood by watching had learned something about courage and about limits. When I locked up the barn at dusk, I'd glance at that framed letter and the old sign beside it. The sign, cracked and faded, still read, "No trespassing," but now it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a statement of peace, not defiance. This place had been trespassed on, invaded, burned by arrogance and entitlement. Yet somehow it had come back stronger, cleaner, freer. The wind moved softly through the tall grass, whispering like an old friend. And every time I heard it, I thought of the sheriff's words, "That's the quietest this town been in years." He was right, not because people stopped talking, but because finally they had nothing left to fight about. And as the sun sank behind the barn, I realized something simple, maybe even sacred. Some storms don't destroy you. They rebuild you, one red board at a time. I learned something that week, something that no book, no courtroom, no law manual could ever truly teach you. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's preparation. That truth came quietly, long after the chaos faded. It came in the mornings when the air was still and the smell of hay filled the barn. It came in the steady rhythm of routine: feed the horses, fix the fence, check the locks, breathe. The kind of routine that had always grounded me, even when everything else spun out of control. For months, Karen and her little HOA army believed they held the reins. They strutted around like generals of a neighborhood kingdom, waving clipboards like they were court orders. But in the end, all they had was noise. And noise doesn't build anything, it only drowns out truth for a while. Real power doesn't come from a position, or a title, or the sound of your own voice echoing at a meeting. It comes from being ready. From knowing your rights, keeping your records, and standing tall when others try to make you kneel. Karen thought her strength came from control, from rules and intimidation, from the idea that fear could keep everyone in line. But when fear met preparation, when her shouting met the quiet steadiness of the law, she realized just how fragile her power truly was. That night, when Sheriff Hank and his deputies stepped out from the shadows of my barn, I saw it in her eyes, that split second where confidence turned into shock. It wasn't anger that hit her first, it was disbelief. For once, she wasn't in control. The world she'd built out of manipulation and gossip had cracked wide open. And standing there, watching her face fall, I didn't feel triumph. I felt something deeper: relief. The kind of relief that comes when the truth finally gets to breathe again. Now, every time I walk into that barn, I remember it all. The smell of pine oil on the wood beams. The way the deputy's flashlight glinted off the steel tools. The sound of justice, calm, clear, undeniable, cutting through the dark. I've come to realize that revenge burns fast, but preparation builds slow and lasts forever. When you fight arrogance with anger, you just feed the fire. But when you fight it with patience and proof, you let the fire burn itself out. The sheriff told me once, most people want to fight, but the smart ones, they build a case. He was right. I didn't win because I shouted louder or hit harder. I won because I waited. Because I documented, recorded, prepared. Because I trusted that truth, when given a fair chance, doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to stand its ground. Sometimes at night, when I lock up the barn, I run my hand along the new door frame, the one I rebuilt after the break-in. It's solid now, smoother than before. There's a little brass plate at the bottom that reads, "Built twice, stands forever." I didn't order it, the sheriff gave it to me. Said it was a reminder that justice might take time, but it's worth building right, and he was right. Every nail, every board, every repair felt like reclaiming a piece of what was taken. Not just the barn, but the piece that used to live here. The townsfolk still talk about what happened, though now it's more like a local legend. The barn's sting, they call it. Kids tell it like a ghost story. Adults tell it like a warning. But for me, it's neither. It's a lesson. I've learned that no matter how small someone tries to make you feel, as long as you stand by the truth, you're bigger than their whole system. You don't have to fight dirty to win clean. You just have to be patient enough to let arrogance collapse under its own weight. Karen's gone now, moved 2 towns over from what I hear. Maybe she'll start over. Maybe she'll finally learn that leading isn't the same as controlling. I don't hate her. Not anymore. In a strange way, I'm grateful. She taught me something about myself, about limits and endurance and faith in the slow grind of justice. Because at the end of the day, I didn't build my barn for revenge. I built it to last. And the people who live by fear and control, they never build things that last. These days, when I walk through the barn doors in the morning, sunlight spills across the floorboards like gold. The dust floats in the air, dancing free. It reminds me that peace doesn't come from winning, it comes from surviving with your integrity intact. Preparation, patience, and proof. Those 3 things will outlast any committee, any clipboard, any so-called power. When I look up at the rafters, I don't just see wood and nails, I see lessons written in light and shadow. And I know, with quiet certainty, the sound of justice, real justice, will always be louder than any saw I ever owned. Because some victories aren't measured by applause or punishment. They're measured by silence. The kind of silence that means the storm has passed and the land is finally your own again.